Our President, Professor Neelam Agarwal, Vice President, Dr. Nuzhat Aziz, chairpersons for today, Professor Pratima Mittal, Dr. Thomas Martin, our faculty for today, and also the chair of the Perinatal Pathology Committee, Dr. Sunil Jaiman, Professor Nandita Kakkar, the secretary for the committee, members of SBSI, and all our pathologist guests today. A very good evening, and we begin our proceedings of the Perinatal Pathology Committee with a warm welcome to all of you by our President, Professor Neelam Agarwal. Dr. Agarwal.
Thank you, Dr. Tamkin. Good evening, everybody. A warm welcome to all of you, whosoever have joined, our faculty, our guests, and our audience. Everybody is most welcome. I congratulate Stillbirth Society of India's Perinatal Pathology Committee to be hosting this webinar. This is the first webinar, and this is the most very important area for us, the obstetricians, because this is indirectly very closely linked to all of us, because whenever we are dealing with a stillbirth, sooner or later the parents will want to know, why did this happen, will it happen again, what should we do? And the next obstetrician, whenever that person is taking care of the rainbow pregnancy, that is pregnancy following the stillbirth, next pregnancy, that person also needs to know what happened during last pregnancy and why did it occur. So answers to these questions are often impossible without complete evaluation, and complete evaluation needs complete clinical as well as conventional autopsy and placental histopathology. The likelihood of finding an explanatory diagnosis depends on the completeness of examination, experience of the pathologist, and if properly done, the number of unexplained stillbirth gets reduced to about one third. 30 to 40% only remain unexplained if the proper autopsy is done. There are many challenges to the perinatal autopsy. Number one, first is getting the consent, which is a very, very important thing. Because for consent for perinatal autopsy, compassionate counseling is a must and very important to obtain the consent. And we have to be very, very gentle when taking up this issue with the bereaved parents, right? Second thing is perinatal pathologists are very few at hardly any places. Here, Dr. Nandita can tell us in detail about this subject, how, why, and how perinatal pathologists are difficult to find. Third thing is, we to have a good autopsy findings and good explanation, we need to have good documentation from the obstetrical side in the form of history and documentation of the notes. And fourth thing is that timely reporting of autopsy is must for answering all these questions. So perinatal pathologist is often thought of as an impartial specialist, as that person has not been involved in the intrapartum or the antepartum events. So I will not take much of the time, and I will just go ahead with the proceedings. And I welcome you once again, all of you. And I thank Dr. Sunil and Dr. Nandita for taking up this important issue and starting our society's webinars with this important webinar. Thank you very much. Mute. You are mute, Dr. Tamkin. Please unmute yourself.
So Dr. Dr. Neelam has already talked about the importance of having good pathologists on board. And we are very lucky and thankful to Dr. Nuzhat for introducing us to Dr. Sunil Jaiman, and he agreeing to be the chair of this committee, and Dr. Neelam proposing the name of Dr. Nandita. And I hope we'll be able to do a lot for this problem in India. Dr. Sunil Jaiman is MBBS MD. He did his MBBS from Assam Medical College, Pathology, MD Pathology from Kasturba Medical College, Manipal, and his RC Path from UK, and his obtained diplomatship from RC Path UK again. And then he dabbled with internal medicine for a few years, doing his diplomat national board. He has worked at Kidwain Memorial Institute of Oncology as a senior resident, at Apollo Hospitals in Hyderabad, and also with Dr. Swarnlata ji, who initiated him into placental and perinatal autopsy pathology in 2004. He says very interestingly, a successful person is one who can lay a firm foundation with the bricks others have thrown at him. And he adds, I built my career and life by the placentas left behind by others. Since the time I booked my life's flight with placenta, I am grateful to that mystic organ. It took me to Denmark. It took me back to India. Under the mentorship of Dr. Evita Fernandez of Hyderabad, he established the Department of Perinatal Pathology there and conducted more than 3,000 placental examinations and 350 autopsies. Placenta again booked his flight to the USA to Perinatal Research Branch, Detroit, USA, and Department of Pathology, Woodsills Women's Hospital, Wayne State University School of Medicine, USA. During the past 16 years of his placental and perinatal pathology expedition, as he calls it, he has delivered 64 presentations, 44 publications related to novel discoveries and unique findings pertaining to placental, fetal, and gynecological pathology. 11 publications reported for the first time in medical literature, 11 awards and felicitations, including 1 gold medal, 9 courses and workshops in placental pathology and perinatal autopsy, and 5 invitations as chairperson and 4 best paper awards. Another gem on our, on our committee is Dr. Nandita Kakkar, Professor, Department of Histopathology, PGI, Chandigarh. Main interests are pediatric pathology, uropathology, bone pathology. She's the course director of postdoctoral certified course in pediatric pathology under the aegis of Indian College of Pathologists. She has a fellowship in pediatric pathology from Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, USA. More than 200 publications, guided more than 80 theses, MD, DM, MCH, PhD, organized a number of conferences and hands-on workshops, and delivered lectures at international and national forums, and also the convener of the Indian Institute of Ethics Committee till 2012. She released a book on 101 medical autopsy cases, adults and pediatric, with complete pathological clinical details and review of literature, which was published by JP Brothers with a foreword from none other than the famous Professor Vinay Kumar of the Robbins Pathology. So we have so many, so we have the next 1 hour, they will be telling us how, revealing us the, mystifying this mystic organ, as he calls it. I'll stop sharing now, and I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Sunil.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that kind introduction. All right, can I share my screen?
Slideshow mode.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, now it's perfect.
All right.
I please request everybody, all participants, to please get them.
Can I start, please? I think, yeah, there was a lot of background noise.
Single piece की packing है कोई?
Okay, that was nice. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tamkin Khan. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Neelam. Thank you for that wonderful introduction to perinatal pathology. It's my distinct honor and pleasure to invite Dr. Pratima Mittal, who is the ex-professor and head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology from Safdarjung Hospital. She has an honorary FRCOG from the Royal College of UK. She is the vice president of FOGSI. She was the vice president of FOGSI in 2018, president she's also the president, Association of OBGYN Delhi, 2015 to 2016. She's member, Technical Resource Group, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India for adolescent health, maternal health, contraception, comprehensive abortion care, and maternal death review. She has collaborated extensively with many WHO projects such as Stillbirth Registry, Maternal and Perinatal Death Surveillance, Mothers in the NICU, MNICU, Preterm Birth Cohort, and she has established one of the first fully equipped obstetrical critical care unit in public sector. She has over more than 70 published papers in international and national journals. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us. It's our great honor and privilege.
Thank you, Dr. Sunil, for nice words.
Thank you, ma'am. The next person I would like to introduce to the audience is Dr. Thomas Morton, who is the head of the Department Cellular Pathology, Birmingham, at Paston, Birmingham. I would like to give a little bit of overview about him. He did his medical training from Semmelweis University. In 1990, he finished his pathology in 1994, and he also dabbled with obstetrics and gynecology in 1998. He went on to obtain his PhD in 2002, and subsequently in 2010, he obtained his FRC path. He has been appointed, he was appointed in Hungary. He was in the Semmelweis University Medical School, and he spent, as you can see, some time in the obstetrics and gynecology, not some, 6 years in obstetrics and gynecology. So his current position is as the head of the department of Birmingham Women's Hospital. He has had numerous scholarships from Italy, from Germany, and 2 from Bristol, UK. His special interest is in dysmorphology of fetuses and the etiology of developmental disorders. He has more than 100 publications and 10 book chapters. It's easy for me to start with book chapters first. And if there are pathologists in this audience, I would like to introduce you to this beautiful book. It's so lucidly written, and it's one of the finest books on placental pathology. And I would recommend everybody to have this book in their shelf. My association with Dr. Thomas goes back. We have a mystic connection. In 2013, I came across 3 cases of abnormal course of umbilical vein. And then when I did a literature search, the first person and the first paper I found was his. Similarly, in 2015, I had a case of cholangioendothelioma, and this was the first paper when I did the literature search. And I had the good fortune of meeting him personally in 2014. And since then, we have been very good friends. It's a time of COVID, and he has a beautiful paper just published a few months ago about the histology or the placental findings in COVID. Massive perivolous fibrin deposition, chronic histiocytic intervillositis, along with trophoblastic necrosis, is nowadays termed as the triad of findings associated with COVID-19. This is a beautiful image. You can see chronic massive perivolous fibrinoid deposition, and this is the COVID-19 spike protein, as you can see. And this is RNA scope in situ hybridization picture. These are beautiful images. The next 2 papers are very important because they tell us the importance of amalgamating genetics, ultrasound or radiology, obstetrics medicine, as well as pathology. We have to have a multidisciplinary approach to stillbirths and to perinatal disorders. This particular paper is on molecular autopsy, and it says, again, the importance of exome sequencing for delineating the cause. India has a huge amount of fetal growth restriction problem, and this is a beautiful paper highlighting everybody, telling everybody the importance of placental examination. Before I wind up and before I invite Dr. Mittal and Dr. Thomas to take over the proceedings. This Semmelweis University, I don't know how many of us know about it, but it's one of the finest universities in the world. And Professor Thomas can maybe highlight a few things about it. And this is a beautiful paper, a tribute to Semmelweis from American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. It was a stamp commemorating Semmelweis's introduction to hand washing, so important today. These are some beautiful pictures. So I would like to hand over the proceedings to Dr. Thomas and Dr. Mittal. Thank you very much. It's an honor that both of you have joined us today.
Good evening. Good evening. Dr. Thomas, would you like to start first?
Thank you. That's very kind of you. And thank you for Sunil Jaiman to ask me to chair these sessions. I really feel honored. And yes, he's absolutely right that our good friendship goes back to many, many, many years. Sunil asked me to say a few words about Semmelweis. Yes, this is the university that I come from. This is a 250 years old university. And Ignaz Semmelweis, who was a Hungarian in those days, because of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, went to work in Vienna. And there in Vienna, he made a huge discovery. There were two obs and gynae departments. And in one of the departments, doctors helped the pregnant women to give birth, and then they went to the mortuary and did autopsies. But they did not wash their hands because in those days, we are talking about the 19th century, bacteria were not known, and they did not know what causes the infection. And many of these poor ladies, these patients, died after that. Among similar features like those who had injuries during the autopsies. And this was the point that Ignaz Semmelweis realized in the mid-19th century, that you need to do something about it and you need to wash your hands. And then he introduced the chlorine water, and himself and his doctors started washing their hands carefully and also disinfecting it with chlorine in the times when they did not even know what exactly that does, but that clearly reduced significantly the mortality of women giving birth. And then he published these findings mostly in German language, I believe. And then subsequently he became head of department at the same institute where I learned my obstetrics and gynecology training, and where I was the perinatal pathologist in those days. So very briefly, this is what I wanted to tell about him. Some countries say also name other people responsible for this huge discovery, but I think he was the first who published it, and this is why Semmelweis is also named as the savior of women. Shall we move on to our busy schedule? And let me introduce Dr. Sunil Jaiman with the vision in the online training module in perinatal pathology. So I hand it over to Sunil. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Sunil, Dr. Sunil, we can see.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so what is the mission and the vision of the Perinatal Pathology Committee? The mission and vision of the committee is to create awareness about the usefulness of placental and the fetal examination amongst pathologists and clinicians throughout India, This would be in the form of conducting online webinars, holding workshops wherever possible, providing referral perinatal services, which could be online and even digital, because there's a lot of digital pathology services. There are a lot of instruments by which slides can be scanned and shared. Participating in clinico-pathological multidisciplinary meetings whenever invited, and collaborating and publishing papers in this field. The goal of Perinatal Pathology Committee is to unravel the mystery of placental and fetal disease processes, advance the understanding of perinatal pathology and its mechanisms, and to extrapolate this knowledge through teaching and publications. The committee would also like to dedicate to all the families who have encountered fetal or neonatal loss. We acknowledge that nothing can compensate the bereavement of the family, but we will hope that by meticulous study of the fetal and neonatal tissues, we will be able to provide some comfort and will help the women and their families in healing process. The training module, we would like to commence from the month of October. It could be online training modules, perhaps 30 minutes, starting with placenta. We could cover the entire, all the lesions of the placenta, and we could then subsequently move on to fetal autopsy techniques and fetal autopsy findings. So we would like to start this from the month of October itself, and we could decide on the dates and everything subsequently. So this is what is on our mind. Thank you very much.
So shall we go to the next scheduled topic? Professor Nandita Kakkar is going to talk about the utility of fetal autopsies. So please, Nandita.
Can you hear me? I'll just share my screen. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll just share that.
I just want to add few things about Nandita. You know, I have seen, listened to her. She is one of the best pathologists to doing the fetal, autopsies. And I have learned from her how to, see the autopsies in our institution, which is a very big tertiary hospital. I have not seen people expert in the fetal autopsies, and she has been such an expert, and I think she can contribute to a great extent in the training also. As Dr. Sunil was talking about the course, I think, it's really she's really a wonderful teacher.
Yes, ma'am. Together, this committee comprises, it cannot be just one person. Without Dr. Nandita's support and help, this will not go anywhere. So I acknowledge her, and it's a great honor. It's a great pleasure. I know her, I met her in Philadelphia, and since then we have been very good friends. Pittsburgh, actually. And we have been good friends. I know she's doing a lot of charitable work also. So I think everybody in the audience must accept not only her knowledge and her prowess in fetal perinatal pathology, but also her kind heart.
At the onset, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sunil. Thank you, Dr. Neelam. Thank you, Dr. Tamkin. Thank you, Dr. Mittal. And thank you, Dr. Tamas. Thank you, everyone, for bringing me here. This is a beautiful platform. And I'm sure we're going to do a very good job all together. And in fact, I was looking for such a platform since a very long time. And here it is. So we really have a lot of work to do. And let's begin that. So can you see the screen?
Yes, Nandita, we can see.
So I'll just do the slide. I'll just go on to the slideshow right now. Yeah. So the topic that was given to me, 30 minutes, and I have to speak on the utility of fetal autopsy. Yeah. So this is it. So this is my institute, and this is like, in fact, it's like a temple for me. And this is my department here, and I work here on the 5th floor. So when I enter this place, this gate every day, I thank God that He's given me this place to work from. And this is each time I just bow down and thank the Lord. So fetal autopsy, it's a massive workload, definitely. We need a trained staff, we need facilities. It's a financial burden on any institute. So like a lot of people tell me, is it worthwhile to do them? And so just let's go on to this topic of utility of fetal autopsy. Now, and it's, at the end of it, we definitely say, yes, we do want to do them. So now the causes of fetal death is, we have a lot of causes. We have the three main causes: the maternal causes, the fetal causes, and the placental causes. So of course, the fetal causes and the placental causes is something that we can, throw light on once we get an autopsy. Now, just first, let's go on to the definitions, because the younger lot should know what the actual definition is. Now, these two terms, fetal death and stillbirth, we do use them synonymously. Now, this is fetal death is death prior to the complete expulsion of a product of conception, irrespective of the duration of pregnancy. Now, it goes on from 8th week onwards until birth. Now, viability is something that is different in different countries. And WHO has its, every country has its own standards here. But what we take in our institute here is 20 weeks, or if we don't know the period of gestation, then it's 500 grams. And if we don't know any of these, then it's 25 centimeters crown heel length, right? So let's go on to now what is pre-viable. Now, pre-viable stillbirth or fetal death is 8th week onwards period of gestation until viability, that is 20 weeks gestation. The early stillbirth or fetal stillbirth or any fetal death, we take it as 20 weeks till 28 weeks gestation. The late stillbirth is from above 28 weeks gestation. And the fetal death rate is the late fetal death, that is more than 28 weeks gestation, quoted per 1,000 total births. For the sake of uniformity, we take the late stillbirth as in the fetal death rate. But then we have this group of 20 weeks till 28 weeks, which is a huge group, wherein we see a lot of pathologies. So I've divided my work into pre-viable, early stillbirth, and the late stillbirth, and that's how I go about it. Now, in the year 2000, the stillbirth rate was quoted as 30 per 1,000 births by it was in India. In the year 2019, it came down to 14 per 1,000 births. And there was a 35% global reduction, which was pretty good. Now, in United Nations reported, released a report about 2020, said that 0.34 million per 1.9 million stillbirths globally occurred in India. So that's a huge number. And the report further said that India, along with 5 other countries, namely Pakistan, Nigeria, Congo, China, and Ethiopia, accounted for nearly half of all stillbirths in the world. Now, a stillbirth means a baby born with no signs of life at or above 28 weeks of gestation or more, according to the UN agencies. Now, we have this paper which came out from our institute. Dr. Bharti Sharma was the main author here. And here, since we are a referral center, we are a tertiary care center, obviously the stillbirth rate is going to be very, very, very high in our institute. So it was about 54 per 1,000 total births. Now, so what is it? Now, what does it give us? It gives us the fetal autopsies. Basically, it gives us, what do I do? How do I remove this? Anyway, so it gives us the fetal and placental causes of death, and to proceed in the right direction for the next pregnancy. So this is what a fetal autopsy gives us. So which way to take is what it tells us. So, and it helps us to achieve our goal, a normal pregnancy and a normal healthy baby given to the mother. Now, fetal autopsy pathology, it's a very unique subspecialty defined by an age group rather than an organ system or process. It's a very complex subspecialty requiring a broad knowledge of normal pathophysiologic processes that varies through development. So a thorough knowledge of embryology, genetics, and functioning of the maternal placental fetal unit is very, very important. It requires the consideration of disorders very unique to the maternal fetal placental unit, and we have all standard protocols which have to be followed. So role is that the death of a formed fetus is actually is the most emotionally devastating event for a parent and also, of course, for the clinicians. And nearer it is to the expected date of delivery, greater is the devastation. Now, recurrent fetal deaths are most devastating of all events. Now, MTP, medical termination of pregnancy for ultrasonographic proven congenital malformations. Now, here in these instances, the parents actually want to know whether they took the right decision in giving the consent for a termination. Concerned, and it's also, this fetal autopsy is also concerned with causes and mechanisms of reproductive loss, and it's a very important modality in decreasing the deaths in the fetal period. So what does it give us? It gives us a positive focus for planning a subsequent pregnancy. See, that pregnancy is already gone, but then it tells us how to focus on the next one. The pathologist can answer in many cases why it happened, will this happen next time, and how can it be prevented? Now, in the present era, the questions the parents ask have actually gone up, and they really want to know a lot of things. And both positive and negative findings are as important. And then we have the mortality audits, which this sets new benchmarks as well. So utility, let's go with the pre-viable first. So utility of pre-viable stillbirths, that is less than 20 or less than that. Now, basically, we have a lot of medical termination of pregnancies which are going on for congenital malformations. So we have to confirm the antemortem ultrasonographic diagnosis for which the MTP was done. Now, this has become a large bulk of the fetal autopsies now. It is very important for the psyche of the parents as they become very satisfied that the MTP was the correct decision. It also confirms the radiological diagnosis. And if there's any discrepancy, of course, it's a big learning for the radiologists. Then there are a lot of cases of spontaneous expulsions before 20 weeks, in which there can be malformations which have not been picked up by ultrasonography, and then a lot of other chromosomal abnormalities or even infections for that matter. Then the early and late fetal autopsies. Here we, of course, document the cause of death and classify them according to the ICD-PM classification system, which we are doing now for uniformity. Then there's detection of the CMF, the congenital malformations, and assessment of recurrences. Now, to confirm if the results of the ultrasonography was accurately reported, meticulous detection of the congenital malformation has to be done. The CMF, was it in a single organ, multiple organs? Is it a syndrome? What are the inheritance patterns? Then dysmorphic features, anomalies accompanying a malformation to calculate the correct risk of recurrence, assessment of the correct risk of recurrence. This is what the mother actually comes here for. When she comes to get the report, she will always ask us, will this recur next time? So this is what is very, very important. And sending the material for the genetic testing. And so, of course, this helps in planning the next pregnancy. Obstetricians, they need to know what? Evaluation of the anatomical maturity, whether the clinical estimate of gestation and fetal growth were correct. This is very important. If the results of the prenatal investigations, like ultrasonography, accurately predicted the fetal growth, maturity, presence or absence of CMF. Evaluation of growth and development of the infant and its individual organs. Detection of any infections in the placenta, sac, or the fetus, detection of asphyxia or any mechanical insult. Death was antepartum, intrapartum, or postpartum. Features of antepartum death, like we look for meconium or any amniotic fluid aspiration in the lung, or even in the extra meconium in the ear canal of the child, and what went wrong and how can we improve. Now, it is very important to the family of the baby and to the clinician. It suits the parents to quite an extent, especially for CMF, not compatible with life as the cause of death. Then, of course, this is very important for our mortality audits. As I said, it sets new benchmarks. And data from the autopsy makes a very important contribution to the regional and national statistics by complementing the clinical data collection. National stillbirth, neonatal and perinatal mortality data is an important index of the nation's health. So these are the reasons why these fetal autopsies are very, very important. Then, of course, for research purposes, then we get to know the pathogenesis of the disease mechanisms, like of the neural tube defects, the developmental cystic diseases of the kidneys, etc. And of course, now we have the era of NGS and a lot of genetic counseling and impact. So this is what we can add on to it and give a perfect diagnosis and the recurrences. So we have the cause of death. We can dwell into the pathogenesis, potential to reduce the stillbirth rate, and it's an important index of the nation's health. So there are lots of articles going on there in the literature where it says that decreasing use of autopsy for stillbirths and infant deaths actually is a missed opportunity. So we should have autopsies for knowing the cause of death. Then the results of full postmortem examination of a cohort of clinically unexplained stillbirths, undetected fetal growth restriction, and placental insufficiency are prevalent findings. So the next one is the clinical utility of perinatal autopsy. So this tells us a lot of things like, for instance, this 168 perinatal deaths were autopsied. Autopsy was not done in 26.2% cases. Of the autopsied cases, the clinical diagnosis was confirmed in 55.3%, but it changed or significantly added to the clinical diagnosis in nearly 45% cases, which is a huge number. So you can imagine how important it is. Then in this paper, despite technological advancements, fetal autopsy remains the gold standard for diagnosing the cause of fetal death. So that's very, very important. And now the genetic counseling, the impact of genetic counseling has come up. This is a paper from Manipal, which is still, I think, has not been published, but it's been accepted. And it's a beautiful paper telling us about the impact on genetic counseling. Now, growth in the perinatal period, it is either appropriate for gestational age or small or large. Now, we have to tell the obstetrician what is the gestational age of the baby that we have autopsied. So we don't go by these, we go by the pathological assessment in which we do the physical measurements and the organ and we see the organ maturation under the microscope. So we do the physical measurements, and the linear measurements correlate better with the period of gestation as compared to the others. Now here we do the crown heel length, which is the standing height, the crown rump or the sitting height. Then we do the head circumference, chest circumference, abdominal circumference, and the foot length. And then we do the facial, just for looking at the facial dysmorphism. We do a meticulous examination of the facial measurements. Then we see whether the ears are low set or not. And then we look under the microscope. Now, if the qualitative assessment of organ maturation, how do we do that? Now, for instance, in the central nervous system, the rate of brain growth, it parallels the body weight from 8th to 40th week of gestation. Now, the brain weighs 92 grams at 24 weeks gestation and 362 grams at 40 weeks gestation. Now, between 20 and 28 weeks gestation, the cells migrate from the periventricular germinal matrix to the cortex. And by 40 weeks, the germinal matrix is devoid of primitive cells. Chiral pattern is very important between 20 and 36 weeks, and it does tell us the period of gestation. So that's very important. Why is it important? It is important because chiral and sulcal development is fairly predictable and provides a major tool to the pathologist for determining the gestational age. And it is not affected by most conditions that produce IUGR. In symmetrical growth retardation, small brains may have a mass same as a fetus of 24 weeks gestation, but a chiral pattern of 30 to 32 weeks. So this established the true length of the gestation. So by seeing the chiral pattern, we can actually estimate the period of gestation. So this is how we do that. And then looking at a lung slide, we can always say where are we, which period of gestation are we in. So we have the embryonic phase, we have the pseudoglandular, acinar, saccular, and the alveolar stage. And so this is where we are, the pseudoglandular stage. This is the next stage. This is the canalicular stage, the saccular stage, and the alveolar stage. So looking at a section of the lung, we can tell the obstetrician what is the period of gestation. Then in the kidney, by just looking at the rows of glomeruli, we can estimate the period of gestation. Till about 23 weeks of gestation, the number of rows of glomeruli are just about 3. And you can see 1, 2, and 3. So this is less than 23 weeks gestation. This is a section of the kidney, and this is the nephrogenic zone. This is where the glomeruli are being formed, and then they're pushed towards the medulla. So, and here we have 5 ranks of glomeruli. We count the ranks like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is about 23 weeks of gestation. And here, this is the liver. Looking at the section of the liver, this is 18 weeks gestation. It looks just like a bone marrow here. Lots and lots of extramedullary hematopoiesis going on. This is a 28-weeker where the hematopoiesis has come down. And this is a 35-weeker where you see minimal amount of extra medullary hematopoiesis. So by looking at the sections from the liver, we can also tell you what is the period of gestation. Now this is a section of the thymus. Now the thymus is a blue thymus here, and this is another thymus from a child where you can, this is a stress involuted thymus. So here the baby has undergone some kind of an asphyxia. So this is what it tells us. Now let's look at the congenital malformations and the utility and how does it help us. So first of all, we get a lot of cases of neural tube defects. Now these neural tube defects can be disorders of primary neurulation, which occur in the first month of gestation. And then we have disorders of secondary neurulation. Now amongst the disorders of primary neurulation, we have anencephaly, encephalocele, meningocele, and all these meningomyloceles and so on. And amongst the neural tube defects, now there are lots and lots of authors who say that there are lots of, we should do an autopsy in all the cases. Now people will say that neural tube defects are visible on the outside, and why should we go in for an autopsy? The reason is that these cases are associated with other malformations. For instance, encephalocele, in about 38% cases of encephalocele, we have associated malformations, and in encephaly, so as in spina bifida. So with them, we can, detect malformations, syndromes, and other entities, and also kind of pave our way towards the, the ones which will probably recur. So this is the case of anencephaly, wherein you see this, even the neural tube at the in the cervical region is open. And here, this is another case of anencephaly. This is an anencephaly with rachis up to the thoracic region. And this is again anencephaly with complete rachis. This is a case of an encephalocele, a posterior encephalocele. And in all cases of encephalocele, we must look at the kidneys properly, because we might be dealing with a case of a Meckel-Gruber syndrome. And here we have meningomyloceles. And this is a case where a mother went in for an MTP, and she was very, very anxious about the autopsy because she wanted to know whether she took the right decision. And this was a case of a split cord syndrome. And here you see that this is the spinal cord coming here, and you see the split cord. This is known as diastenomatomyelia. So confirm the diagnosis. Now, this is a case of a hydrocephalus. Now, anyone would say, why do we need an autopsy for a case of a hydrocephalus? It's so evident that this baby has a hydrocephalus. But then there are so many things I'll come to, like they are associated with a lot of cranial and extracranial anomalies, which we have to document. And that will lead us towards whether these, what is going to be the recurrence rate in these cases of hydrocephalus. And there are cases of congenital hydrocephalus which recur. And now this Adder et al. Found 2 families with recurrent congenital hydrocephalus for the 4th time. Imagine. And the first showed evidence of X-linked recessive form, while the second was an autosomal recessive form. So that's how autopsies teach us so much. And here, Leponzina et al., they found autosomal recessive hydrocephalus because of aqueduct stenosis. So until and unless we do an autopsy, we're not going to know about the aqueductal stenosis. And then Weller et al. Did genetic and clinical aspects of X-linked hydrocephalus. And there were mutations in the L1 CAM gene. So this is where we have come because of our, while doing autopsies in cases of hydrocephalus. Now, in early disruptions of the forebrain formation, we have holoprosencephaly, agenesis of corpus callosum, other early malformations like Dandy-Walker, Arnold-Chiari, and so on. So this is a case of A. lobar holoprosencephaly. This is one of our cases of a semi-lobar holoprosencephaly. This is a baby who came with a cleft lip and cleft palate and also had holoprosencephaly. Then this is agenesis of corpus callosum. So we find all such cases in our autopsy. These are all our autopsy material. And this is a case of an Arnold-Chiari malformation where we find that the vermis has gone into through the foramen magnum into the spinal canal. This is a case of lysencephaly, which is what is known as a smooth brain. And then this is a case of a pachygyria. This is a case of a polymicrogyria. And this is and so on. So let's go on to the renal malformations. Now a word about them. So I still have some time. I have about, I think, 10 minutes more. So renal malformations, we divide them into, in our institute, we get a lot of renal malformations. So we are following the classification of Risdon et al., the modified classification of Risdon et al., and we are dividing them into developmental and genetic conditions. Now, as the word says, developmental conditions, they would seem not to recur, but that's not the case. Now, under the developmental conditions, we have the renal dysplasias and we have the renal hypoplasias. So let's go on to the renal dysplasia. Is known as is abnormal differentiation of metanephric parenchyma, and renal hypoplasia is reduction in the total number of nephrons. So they come under developmental disorders, and under the renal dysplasia, we have the multicystic dysplasia, we have agenesis, we have hypoplastic dysplasia, segmental dysplasias, and then we have congenital hydronephrosis with or without dysplasia. Now, this is a classical case of a bilateral multicystic dysplasia, and here the pelvis is fused with a mass. And this is the classic grapes, the bunch of grape appearance. And here we found these primitive ducts, which is the hallmark of dysplasia. So this is a multicystic dysplasia. This was a baby which came to us, 36-weeker, nearing term, and this had a portus facies, grimace. This had this peculiar grimace, bags under the eye, a parrot beak nose, flexion at the knees and the hips, and there was renal agenesis. Bilateral renal agenesis. Then we have this case wherein we have, these are the two kidneys. The kidneys they have reniform shape, they're symmetrically enlarged, and they have cysts on the surface. Then the ureters are both markedly dilated and tortuous. And this is the urinary bladder, which is markedly hypertrophied. And on cut section, what do we see? We see the hydronephrosis. We see that rim of cortical rim of the cortex is this rim, and then you have a dilatation of the pelvic glacial system. Now, in the previous case, you found the bunch of grapes appearance, but here you find that the reniform shape is maintained. And so this is a case of a posterior urethral valve, where with congenital hydronephrosis with dysplasia. So this is another case of a hypoplastic dysplasia where you find two small kidneys, the ureters are malformed, the bladder is also thickened and malformed, and you find that the gut is opening into the urinary bladder, right? Now, what is hereditary renal dysplasia? Now, as I said, the developmental disorders do not recur, but then there is a group amongst them which does recur, and they come under the category of hereditary renal dysplasia. Now, we had this case where G1 had, this was a mother, a 27-year-old mother, she was G3. Her first baby had enlarged hydronephrotic kidneys, the MTP was done, but the autopsy was not done. G2 had multicystic kidneys again, and G3 was the present pregnancy, which was, and there were twins here. And this time she had bilateral renal hypoplasia. So this third time the autopsy was done, and she had a recurrence of developmental disorders, renal disorders each time in her pregnancy. So this is a case of a hereditary renal dysplasia, means that this is an autosomal dominant disorder in some cases, and the mode of inheritance is yet to be deciphered in a large number of such cases. So once the diagnosis of renal dysplasia is made, we have to decipher the type of dysplasia. We look for associated malformations, try to fit it into a syndrome. And if it's non-syndromic and there's renal agenesis or dysplasia, then parental counseling has to be done before they produce their next baby. So in hereditary renal dysplasia, the mode of inheritance can be autosomal dominant and can be recessive. Occasionally has also been found to be X-linked. So amongst the genetic conditions, we have the classic cases of autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease. So this was a mother who was G8, and she'd had a number of abortions and losses. Now this was her baby's kidneys. Bilateral symmetrical enlargement of both the kidneys with maintained reniform shape, and you have myriads of pinhead-sized cysts on the capsular surface. And on cut section, the typical sun-ray appearance of ARP kidney, and the classical microscopic picture of autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease. No
Lady, please. Lady.
And rectal plate malformation was seen along with. This is another. I think you'll have to mute. This is another case, a baby who weighed 160 grams. And you can see the encephalocele here. You can see the flanks, which were so full. And then on opening, you can see them, both the kidneys are very large with cysts on the surface. The lungs were both hypoplastic. And also these are the two kidneys again. And then there was polydactyly in all the, both the hands and the leg, in the feet. And then they had, this was a case of Meckel-Gruber syndrome with primitive duct seen here. This is the multicystic dysplastic kidney, and ductal plate malformation is also present. So a case of Meckel-Gruber. This is a case of a prune belly syndrome where you see the abdomen is markedly dilated. You can see this expanded huge abdomen here, and the kidney and on opening, these are the two kidneys here. This is a huge urinary bladder. The ureters are here and opening. The kidneys are well preserved actually, but with mild dilatation of the pelvic dilation system. But this is the bladder, which is so huge and glistening, and the kidneys are well maintained. But then you have the typical collagenous material in between the muscle fibers of the urinary bladder and the ureters, which is the classical, microscopic feature of a prune belly syndrome. Now I can't go into details of the prune belly here. These are the ureters. This is another case of a prune belly syndrome, and you can see the flanks. You can see the two kind of footballs on either side. And then we have also seen cases of Eymark syndrome, which is the renal hepatic pancreatic dysplasia. So I think I should hurry up now. This is a case of Eymark syndrome. We have a multicystic dysplastic kidney. We have pancreatic fibrosis, and we have ductal plate malformation in the liver. And then we have also, we come across the glomerulocystic the kidney disease. This is a glomerulocystic kidney disease wherein you have symmetrical enlargement of both the kidneys with cysts on the surface. Looks quite like ARP kidney. But then if you look at the microscopic picture, you have cortical cysts, and then you have the typical glomerular cysts. So, so any unexplained death, resuscitation failure, what we found cases of tracheoesophageal fistula, like what you see here. And then we have found primary lung hypoplasia in a large number of cases. We do come across them. This is a case of CPAM, a congenital pulmonary adenomatoid malformation type 1. These are the two lungs here, and one of them had CPAM. And this was a very interesting case of congenital high airway obstruction. This is the larynx here. This is totally stenosed. And you can see the voluminous expansion of both the lungs with rib markings on the surface. And you can see the nice sweet heart, peeping out here. So this is a case of congenital high airway obstruction. And this is the microscopic examination of the lungs. The lungs look like this on cut section. Then we have seen cases of congenital diaphragmatic hernias. You can see the colon right in the thorax. And then we have seen a lot of abdominal wall defects, omphalocele, gastroschisis, body stalk defects. I don't have much time to go into details of each one of them. This is a case of a body stalk. Body stalk defects, they have a lot of skeletal abnormalities associated with them. And even in them, the autopsies are very, they are needed because they are associated with a lot of other malformations also. Now, infections, we have seen cases of CMV. This is the characteristic owl-eyed appearance of this is the lung section of the lung wherein you see the CMV inclusions. Then we see congenital pneumonia in a large number of cases indicating infection. And then we saw a very interesting case where this is the lungs of a child, a newborn child, having these whitish nodules, granulomas, and abscesses. And then look at this. This is the acid-fast bacilli. Lots and lots of acid-fast bacilli. So this was the liver also showed granulomas with acid-fast bacilli, and the spleen also showed granulomas. So did the kidneys. And this was a case of a congenital tuberculosis, which is also it is well-known entity and underrated. In fact, it is underdiagnosed condition. Then we've seen cases of perinatal hemochromatosis. You see the section of the liver wherein you see a lot of loss of hepatocytes, and then you see the pearl stain with a lot of pearls positive material. Then we've seen cases of perinatal Gaucher's. This was a 32-weeker. This is a section of the thymus, and you can see the Gaucher cells here positive for CD68. And then, of course, the hydrops fetalis. This needs a meticulous, workup. And because a lot of causes, non-immune hydrops has a large number of causes, and we have to go into details of each one of them. I can't do that. This is a case. So a large number of our hydrops cases show congenital malformations. This is a case of cystic hygroma, sacrococcygeal teratoma. This is we have seen cases of CHOS syndrome, congenital high airway obstruction syndrome with hydrops. Then we have seen cases of parvovirus with hydrops, CMV with hydrops. And in term babies, we've seen some peculiar things. We've seen a lot of meconium aspiration syndrome. So term babies show they die because of MAS. This is the case of MAS, and you can also see polymorphs in the surrounding alveolar spaces. Then we always look at the pancreas of these stillbirths. And in large number of them, we come across a lot of islet cell hyperplasia. So this is a case of islet cell hyperplasia, and we use the insulin stain to demonstrate that as well. And then we've seen congenital tumors. This was a congenital mesoblastic nephroma in a stillbirth. This is a congenital neuroblastoma in a stillbirth. This was a case of a congenital fibrosarcoma in a stillbirth, and so on. And then, of course, we go in for the nowadays we are doing the ICD-PM classification. We report according to that. And so this is the city beautiful. And so this is for Dr. Thomas. You must come over to Chandigarh sometime. And so this is our city here. And thank you very much. So I think I finished on time.
Fantastic lecture. Thank you very much. I think we learned everything that we need to know about perinatal pathology. Really impressed. Fantastic images, photographs, and really a comprehensive approach to the subject. Thank you very much. I'm really very good. Thank you.
So at the end of it, I would say we really need an autopsy, you know, for cause of death.
Yes.
It's mandatory, I think.
Can I ask the organizer, do we have any questions after Dr. Sunil Jaiman's lecture? Because
can we have questions now or later on?
Ma'am, as you wish. You people are the chairpersons.
Can you give? I mean, Dr. Sunil may be getting late or something.
Okay, so we'll have first his presentation.
But I just
Yes.
want to, just want to give my one comment that excellent lecture, such a comprehensive and informative thing. And, knowing the fetal age, we have got a FGR as a most important cause. And for that, if you are able to, really identify it by this autopsy, it's really great. And as far as I was just wondering, Dr. Nandita, that what is the role of, ultrasound and minimal tissue biopsies? We are doing minimally invasive tissue sampling also for the stillbirths. So if you combine both of them, ultrasound, 3D ultrasound and minimally invasive tissue sampling, so what will be your say on that? We will discuss it after I think Dr. Sunil's talk.
Yes. So can we ask?
Yeah, I've stopped sharing now.
Okay. So then our next speaker is Dr. Sunil Jaiman, who is going to show his video recording on placenta grossing techniques in the Indian setting. Sunil.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I start, Dr. Nandita, that was an excellent lecture, very fascinating. It was so lucid, and all of us, I think everybody enjoyed. And as you know, perinatal autopsy or perinatal or stillbirths or anything related to problems with the baby, it's incomplete without the placental examination. Dr. Nandita has beautifully told us how to approach a baby, how to look at systematically how to approach the baby and do fetal autopsies. And I would like to now show a small video, just a very brief 15-20 minutes video. It's self-explanatory, but I would like to, in between, give some comment. It's silent. And I have to thank Fernandez Hospital, Dr. Evita Fernandez, because this was taken in Fernandez Hospital, this video. And I have to thank Mr. Srinivas, who did the video recording. And here we go. So this was the department. And we had I had called this, it was inspired by the RC Path logo, and I call it the Hidden Science Essential for Cure. This was the department at Fernandez. And this was a team of the entire team. We had technicians and the receptionists and everything. And this is our grossing table. And you can see the placenta, the piles. There were thousands of placentas. If there are pathologists here who want to know how to grow, so these were the instruments. And then we come to the placenta. The most important thing is to figure out what all is there. So we start with the measurement. We measure the placenta, the umbilical cord insertion, how far it is from the margins. Then we measure the umbilical cord, the length of the umbilical cord. We measure the width or the dimension, thickness of the umbilical cord. It's important to actually to document the thickness at different levels. And then we do the counting. And we have to see which way, the number of coils, and as well as the direction of the coiling. And then we detach the umbilical cord and we take sections. One section is nearly 5 centimeters from the insertion. Then there's one section from the mid of the umbilical cord. And then one section is taken from the distal end of the umbilical cord. All three can be actually kept in one cassette. I will just pause here and say, this is in the Indian setting because placentas are received in formalin. A lot of times, or at least in the US, we process placentas which are freshly delivered. There's a lot of difference between freshly delivered placentas and formalin fixed placentas. So these are formalin fixed placentas, and that's why you see the color difference. And so here we take at least three sections must be taken from the umbilical cord. And then we go on to look at the membranes. Membranes, as you see, they should be translucent. And if the membranes are non-translucent or there are color changes, we need to document that. Suppose it's meconium stained or something. And then we make a Swiss roll, and you can see normally we take at least 2 to 3 sections from the membranes. Membranes are very important, especially in documenting acute chorioamnionitis. And there are other lesions like leukocytoclastic necrosis, and there are various other atherosis. All those conditions can be diagnosed by looking at the membranes. After we take sections from the umbilical cord and the membranes, we look at the disc. You can see here we are looking at the surface or the chorionic plate vessels. That is the decidual. This is the decidual plate. You can see there are some white foci, there are some marginal infarctions, and then we weigh the placenta. That's a trimmed placenta. So we document as a trimmed weight of the placenta, and we measure the dimensions. You can see it's always good to take at least 2 different dimensions and then average it. After that, we slice the placenta. Placenta is a big organ, so we need to give at least 1 centimeter parallel sections throughout the placental disc. And then after giving these sections, we examine the placenta grossly to see if there are any macroscopically visible lesions. So you can see here, after I have given the sections, I have bisected or multisected the placenta. I look at the surface. And we take sections which should be throughout, which should involve the chorionic plate as well as the basal plate. So you can see I am taking multiple sections which cover both the chorionic plate and you can see the chorionic plate here and the basal plate. It's important to have that. If the placenta is thicker than the size of the cassette, then we do take a full section, then we bisect the section into 2. Here you can see a thrombus just below the chorionic plate, this is an old thrombus. So, sorry, this is actually fresh hemorrhage here. So there is an old thrombus later on, I'll show you. So you have seen, we have taken a few sections from apparently normal looking areas, but then we also take sections from apparently abnormal areas. So you can see here, these are all sections, multiple sections from the, there is no consensus. Actually, some people say 3 to 5 sections, but at least in our setup in US and here in Fernandez Hospital, I used to take 10 sections. So overall, there were 15 sections from the placenta. I know a lot of people would say it's a waste or why take 15 sections, but we need to look at the placenta. The organ involvement is not homogeneous. Most of the lesions are heterogeneous. They are scattered. And there you see, after the sections are taken, we close the cassettes, submit for processing, and slides are ready for examination. A very simple and a very brief presentation of how to gross the placenta in an Indian setting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sunil. I think after a mesmerizing lecture of Dr. Nandita, this was an icing on the cake. It was really, really good. And I mean, I really didn't know that this is such a big, good academic feast I'm, having today. And I really didn't know that such small things, can give you so much of information. Really, really nice. Thank you very much. Excellent talk.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Sunil, in our circumstances, how many sections would you like us to have?
At least 5.
Oh, good. I thought so.
At least 5.
Wonderful.
Dr. Nandita.
This is minus the cord and minus the membrane?
Yeah, minus the cord and the membranes. Okay, because especially if you look at especially chronic inflammatory lesions like villitis of unknown etiology, they're very focal and they're scattered many times. Even thrombi can be seen scattered. So it's very important to take 5 sections. So a lot of times when we look at the placenta grossly, we may not find a lot of lesions, but that's even more important that we take more sections. So minimum 3 to 5, but I would go with 5.
I thought so. Good.
Okay, shall we take questions from the presenters?
Chat box.
So shall I read out the questions? Dr. Sunil, you would like to do that from the chat box? Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, Dr. Lanjevar says, it was nice to see you. Yes, sir, I'm honored. Thank you very much for joining. There is a question, do you have training for fetal autopsies at PGI? Dr. Nandita.
Pardon, just repeat.
The question from Dr. Nuzhat. She asks whether you have a training for fetal autopsies at PGI Chandigarh.
We are having a PDCC course in pediatric pathology in which we are training them for the fetal autopsies as well. We don't have a separate course as such, but then if you want one, we can have one. We can start one, no problem.
Yeah, I think that should be done because normally I have to go back to UK and I have to talk about Professor Wigglesworth. He was the one who pioneered perinatal pathology. Yes. Unfortunately, then we had the Alder-Hayes scandal, Dr. Thomas would know. And then, it became that people got scared and nobody wanted to go to perinatal pathology and they merged it with pediatric pathology, which I think is very sad because perinatal pathology by itself is a specialty. And if PGI can start this, it would be a wonderful thing. It would be a great thing for the community, for our country, I think, for everybody. Just perinatal pathology course, PDCC or whatever, it would be an amazing thing.
I'll do that.
And
Yes,
then we have,
I can just echo that. Yes. Yeah, I fully agree with that.
so there are a lot of compliments from a lot of people. Everybody is complimenting Dr. Nandita, excellent lecture. Then there is a question, please comment on imaging autopsies as most parents refuse for autopsy. This is from, of course, Ma'am Tamkin Khan. Most parents refuse autopsy, so what do you do?
No, in our setup, I don't think they refuse autopsies. Once they're told that the next, everything about the next baby depends upon this baby's autopsy, they go in for it. And believe it or not, nowadays I get a lot of autopsies from outside the PGI. They come to us with the baby. In fact, the baby is, been kept out for the night, and they bring it to me. It's an authorized baby, but yet I do it for because I can still find, something or the other in that.
May I request everyone to mute, please?
Dr. Neelam can probably answer this question better.
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Nandita. Nandita, our autopsy rate, fetal autopsy rate, means newborn autopsy rate is around 70 to 80%, right? Stillbirth?
It's more, actually during the COVID it came down, but now
Yeah, because almost 80% means that's a very good autopsy rate. And I think our counseling goes like this only, that okay, this has happened this time, but at least you will get some answer to your questions for the next pregnancy. Once you talk about the next pregnancy and you give them hope that this will help you in the next pregnancy, they usually agree. So counseling and counseling is very, very important.
So, ma'am, I just wanted a comment, or how will it compare ultrasound guided biopsy with autopsy? Because we are working in an area which is mainly Muslim population, and they have religious, it's very difficult to convince them for autopsy. So that is why I was asking if you compare it with some ultrasound guided biopsy, how will it compare with? No, it will not.
this won't
Imaging
help at all.
autopsies.
Because for an autopsy, when we have a system, when we see the external examination, then we do all the measurements, the external examination, then when we do an in situ examination. In that, we found so many cases of dextrocardia. I was just looking at my pictures today, just to put in, because there was not much time, just half an hour, I can show you so many things. So it's the in situ examination, which is so important. And then, of course, you're going to take, sections from practically so many organs. So I don't think, unless, you are sure that something is there in the lung or it's something there in the kidneys, maybe if you're directed towards that, that's okay. But I don't think it's going to be the same at all.
Dr. Tamkin, can I add one thing here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Tamkin, I think at least term losses and the ones with unexplained stillbirth, there we can at least motivate them to get the autopsy done, at least unexplained ones.
Dr. Neelam, here I would like to disagree with you. What happens is that in your institution, there is credibility that the autopsy is going to tell you something. In most of the institutions, the people who are doing autopsies are not available at all. And if they are available, their credibility is not very high. I mean, they ask us, what is the chances of, me knowing that this patient, I will be gaining something for the next pregnancy. And then I said, I don't know. So I think that is also very, very important. So
yeah, that brings again the same thing, that we should have much more.
गुड़िया तबीयत ठीक नहीं है क्या आज?
Yes.
Dr. Divya. Thank you. Somebody muted everybody, I think. Everybody is muted.
Yeah. I think we can unmute individually.
Yeah.
I think that's, yeah. So, if I may add to that, ma'am, there's some papers by Professor Neil Sabir from UK who's talked about minimal invasive autopsies. But I don't know, because we also, when I was in Fernandez in Hyderabad, Hyderabad also has a large Muslim population, but I don't know, Dr. Nusrat may be able to tell, but at least more than half of the patients I used to autopsy were all from Muslim families. So I think a lot of it depends on counseling. A lot of it depends on the clinician, how we motivate the family, how we tell the patient that, look, you are going to get an answer. And it's very important for you, for your future generations, for future babies. So that is, and minimal invasive autopsy in an Indian setup, I don't, as Dr. Nandita has said, I don't think it's at this moment of time, it's practical. It's very difficult in an Indian setup. And as she also said, there are multiple congenital anomalies which cannot be picked up only by histology, only by doing microscopic examination.
Thank you.
Make a point here.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so I'll just tell you one very interesting thing. There was this patient who had lost 2 babies, and the third time they were from Jalandhar, and they lost the 3rd baby in Jalandhar. So this person, he came all the way in the morning. He was standing in front of my office. He brought the baby. He said, "I need to get this baby autopsy." He was the grandfather of this child. I was so amazed and I was so shocked. He had the baby in his arms, and he was crying bitterly. And that baby had an hereditary renal dysplasia. And then this third, the one which I showed you, that photograph, the bilateral small kidneys, simple hypoplasia of the 3rd time. And so that mother had lost 4 babies. And then they came to me and they said, I think it's an autosomal dominant condition and 50% chance of it being normal. Now they are in, he's a Granthi in Toronto, and he just gave me a mail sometime back saying that they've got a baby boy. And they took the chance, and that they were in that 50%. So that's what happened. So this is how people are, this is how they run after autopsies, at least in this part of the country.
No, exactly. Even in South India, we used to get cases from all over South India. So I think it's, as you rightly said, patients really want it. Families who have had a stillbirth or who have a congenital anomaly, they want an answer. And as everybody says, perhaps Dr. Nandita, you should start a PDCC course in perinatal pathology. Then Dr. Nusrat also says that absolutely impressive work. Fetal autopsy is very essential, but all of us struggle to convince parents. We all need to explore on how to counsel. It would be interesting to know ideas to help each one of us. Then Dr. Lanjivar has said, Dr. Nandita, excellent presentation. I'm impressed with your lecture, and sometimes I wish I had 2 months training in your department. Congratulations. So look, Professor Lanjivar, I have been interacting with him for a long time. I used to have online sessions last year, and he's so enthusiastic. I think we have to respect seniors, and we have to. There's so much of enthusiasm in his especially when it comes to perinatal work. We have to. You have to start something.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And Paripona, sir.
And then very informative. Dr. Kale says thanks. Thanks, Dr. Nandita ma'am, for a wonderful presentation. Everybody's appreciating your lecture, Dr. Nandita. It's been fantastic. Eye-opener talks. And then Dr. Nusrat says, Dr. Thomas from Fernandez, thank you for joining. I have been to Birmingham many times. We use GAP from Perinatal Institute. Professor Jason, it's a pleasure to connect with you. Hope I get a chance to meet you when COVID disappears. So I think that is Dr. Sheetal, that's the last comment here. Wonderful session. Looking forward to hands-on training and online sessions to complement. Yes, absolutely. That's what Dr. Nandita and we are going to do next 12 months, or maybe later on, hands-on training, online training to pathologists, to everybody, anyone who is interested in perinatal. It's such a pleasure to have there were 80 people who had attended on perinatal pathology. So it's a great honor. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
So is that all?
So I think that is all. The questions are over. I think now the next is Dr. Thomas gives expert comments and Dr. Pratima gives concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. How to start? I'm really impressed, and congratulations for the Perinatal Pathology Committee for organizing this event. I think you cannot emphasize how important perinatal pathology is. And unfortunately, this is my perception from the general world of pathologists, that many of the general pathologists believe that they can do perinatal pathology. And it's only when you start digging into the subject and exploring the subtle minute details and huge information and benefits of perinatal pathology, when you start appreciating how completely different this subject is and what the importance is. And absolutely, if there is a family, a bereaved family with a lost baby, then it's a must that you need to give information to them to help to have healthy reproduction. I think the two lectures really echoed that, and I'm really looking forward. It's a very good initiative, and to spread the good news is extremely important. I would like to reflect slightly on the Muslim community's approach or perception of fetal or perinatal autopsies. Here in Birmingham, we also have a huge Muslim community, and some of them will not engage with the bereavement services. But our perception is, the more you can tell us an information for the clinicians, the more they are going to ask, and they almost demand us, and they demand our service. And many Muslim families have also been supported by us. We can work around them. So if there is a request to release the body early or on time for a Friday funeral, then we can work around them. We can do minimal invasive autopsy as well. It's not minimal for the pathologist because you still need to do the brain work, but it's minimal for the family. And if this is what they want, what they require, then we can again accommodate these kind of issues. Many of the publications from the Great Ormond Street by Prof. Neil Sabir are research-based. So unfortunately, for example, Birmingham and the Birmingham Women's Hospital cannot offer post-mortem non-invasive methods, but we've got very good fetal medicine department, and the arrangement how the service works is that we get the baby for the autopsy. We work together with the fetal medicine people, and then we also work together with the clinical geneticists. So it's as it was alluded at the beginning of the lecture, this is always a multidisciplinary approach that we've got, especially with the complex cases. But I also would like to emphasize that, as it was said classically, a good medical history is half the diagnosis. So the more information that we get from our obstetrics colleagues and from the prenatal diagnosis, the more answers we can give. And also the fact that if there are specific clinical questions, that is something that always needs to be asked, because then we can focus on that and we can try to target that particular specific question. Placentas, just like the two places where Sunil, you used to work currently, we used to get the placentas fresh, and we still get the placentas fresh. The benefit of a fresh placenta is that you can sample it for genetic testing, and especially if there is no parental consent for the postmortem examination, then you can take a small piece of tissue for genetic sampling. And after that, since COVID started, we tend to fix the placentas to prevent infection. So I think this is the synopsis or the summary that I would like to add to it. So can I just pass on for the closing remark, unless there are any questions to Dr. Pratima Mittal.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. And thank you, Dr. Tamkeen, Dr. Neelam, for giving me this opportunity to be part of this important webinar. You know, I'm really enjoying every moment of it. And as far as I am an obstetrician, and you know, seeing all these presentation, it's really an eye opener. You know, so many things which we don't even, understand that this can happen because of this. And so many explanations are coming from these autopsies and from the placental examination, even the cord examination. I think that's a great thing. So all of you, all as an obstetrician, all of us have to make an effort that at least for unexplained, to start with, at least for all unexplained deaths, we must get an autopsy done. Of course, as Dr. Nandita has said, that we have to get autopsy even for the patients who have had congenital anomalies, obvious congenital anomalies, because we can make out some syndromes for which we can, really give the genetics counseling can be done. So those things are very, very important. And knowing information which these autopsies are giving and which your placental examination is giving, I think it's beyond our, our clinical assessment. And definitely we have to counsel the patient, and good counseling, I think, definitely will allow all the patients to agree for, autopsies. At the moment, the limitation is the, trained pathologist, as well as the consent from the patient's relatives for giving the consent for the autopsy. But I think if you take really interest, and if we have a pathologist as passionate about the work as Dr. Nandita is, I think we can really find out many questions, unanswered questions to be answered. Thank you very much.
So after this mesmerizing talk by Dr. Nandita and engrossing, if I may say, video on the gross pathology of the placenta, thank you so much, all of you, for joining today. But before we end, I just want to inform you that the newsletter for this month is focusing on perinatal pathology and its role in stillbirth. And it has a reducing stillbirths concept note by Dr. Nuzhat Aziz, and faulty presentation of maternal vessels and placental dysfunction, a window to the future health of mothers, psychosocial impact of stillbirth on parents, agony, blame, contrition, debility, why study the placenta, and management of stillbirth, joining the broken pieces by Dr. Seema Thakur. So we are all waiting for Dr. Aisha, who's working very hard along with the co-editor, Dr. Apala. And in a day or two, we'll be posting this month's newsletter to all of you. So now I request Dr. Asna to please present a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Tamkeen. All good things must come to an end. And so, as much as I hate to do this, I have been called upon to close this wonderful session by proposing a vote of thanks for all the people who have contributed to making this a very stimulating academic event. First and foremost, I wish to express my gratitude to our President, Dr. Neelam Agarwal, and our Vice President, Dr. Nuzhat Aziz, for being the guiding force behind the Stillbirth Society of India. I would also like to thank Dr. Tamkeen Khan. It is through her vision and efforts that the society has taken shape in this manner. I wish to express my appreciation for our patrons, Dr. Evita Fernandez and Dr. Pratima Mittal. international and national advisory board members for their encouragement and support. I take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. Sunil Jaiman for the meticulous planning and wonderful execution of the scientific program. On behalf of the entire team of Stillbirth Society of India, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to you, Dr. Sunil Jaiman, and to Dr. Nandita Kakkar for accepting the responsibility of the Perinatal Pathology Committee despite your busy schedules. I'm also very grateful to Dr. Thomas Martin for so graciously sparing time for us and for sharing his knowledge and expertise. My colleague, Dr. Aisha, deserves thanks for putting together the Perinatal Pathology Committee issue of the newsletter. Finally, I take this opportunity to thank Ms. Ishika and Deblina and our tech partners, Clarinet, for the perfect logistic support that they have extended to us. I would also like to acknowledge and thank all the members of the Stillbirth Society of India and all other guests and pathologists who have logged in today for being a great audience. We invite you to join the Stillbirth Society of India and be a part of this endeavor. Thank you very much once again. Have a great evening.